This is one of the big ones you learn in your 20s. Hopefully you learn it in your 20s. I think safely I've seen some people into their 30s who still haven't figured this out. But again, this goes back to the 6 human needs psychology we're talking about. There are certain needs and expectations that we're looking for that sometimes we don't even understand are driving our behavior that is leading us back to the same type of person, right? So it's, why do I always date the asshole? Or why do I always find myself in relationships that are unhealthy or end up becoming toxic, or a narcissist, or somebody who's totally focused on themselves? Or, maybe you're the person who always finds great people that are exciting to be around, and you're enjoying that. People are like, how do you always find great people? In all cases, it's filters that you set based on your needs, what you're looking for. And again, this comes back to closing the gap between your ideal and real self. So ideally, if you ask somebody, what does your partner look like? They would say things like honest, committed, hardworking, ambitious, good looking, great personality. Things that you would expect are very typical. But when you really pull back the layers and understand through awareness, what are you looking for? They're very often not the same thing. And a lot of you are not surprised to hear, very often our frame for what a good girlfriend or boyfriend or husband or wife looks like comes from our family unit, what we saw in our family. How many times we said, I'm dating somebody that's just like my dad, or dating somebody that's just like my mom, or you remind them or they remind you of a parent. Well, very often those early days made the impression of what a relationship should look like. And so we got to go back in and look and go, is that really what I want? And if I want something different, how am I going to achieve that? But a lot of that is based on filters and comes back to just a general lack of awareness of what it is we're trying to fulfill with the relationship. What advice would I give to somebody in the qualities in their relationship? What are lasting qualities in relationship that we should be looking for? So it's a fair question, but I would say, I don't know that there's a one size fits all to that answer. And that's part of the discovery, is figuring out what works best for you. Certainly, there are things that lead to lasting success in relationship, and we can point to that, and I'll share those very quickly. The old adage, opposites attract, is true, but only to a point. All right, and the attraction is more on the personality front. Opposite personalities very often are attractive to one another, and that seems obvious for a few reasons. But opposite values and character traits is a death nail. If your values are much different than your partner's, that relationship is set up for failure. It's going to be very hard to navigate through the tough decisions of life that are inevitable when you're in relationship. Where to buy a house, how to engage with family, how many kids to have kids, how do we parent the kids? If there's a different value system, well, that leads to different priorities. Those priorities will create problems down the line. So you want to make sure that there are certainly shared values. But beyond that, you also want to make sure that you have shared communication style, or that you learn how to work with an opposite communication style. But ideally, the same communication style is most effective. So, for instance, if you grew up in a family, well, let's pick on the Italians really quick because it's a classic one. If you grew up in an Italian family where everyone was really loud and obnoxious and they yelled at each other when they were frustrated, and that's just how you worked things out, and you decide to partner with somebody who was far more reserved, and when they were hurt or they were frustrated, they tended to withdraw and deal with it personally before they ever communicated. That very often can cause problems in relationship. Now, that's something you can work through and not necessarily a deal breaker, but if you don't understand that, it's like oil and water. They're going to keep butting into each other. One wants to engage and feels like they're not loved because the person is disengaging and wanting to deal with it themselves, and the person that's disengaging will feel like they're not being respected because they need time to process. So shared values are very important. Shared communication is important, especially around conflict resolution, and then shared goals and vision. Wanting the same things, having those things in alignment. And a lot of that is very hard to figure out, especially in your early 20s, which is why, no surprise, statistically, below the age of 25 has the highest divorce rate. And that has a lot to do with you're still figuring out who you are. So if you don't know who you are, very difficult. You're kind of gambling getting into a relationship for that time, figuring out who you really are first. Then it gets easier to figure out, okay, what kind of partner do I really want to be with?